when you put these projects in place, you do know that there's a good chance that they're going to be successful. Pretty much in all cases, the initial innovation project has been successful, and that's led to the company being able to continue to move through its development. There comes a point where you go, that's no longer anything to do with our initial piece, but in those immediate years following the innovation project, you can go, okay, that is credible co-investment that's come off the back of that initial investment piece by UKRI.
Welcome back to the Decarb Connect podcast. My name is Alex Cameron from Decarb Connect, and I'm here today with Bruce Adderley, the Challenge Director focused on transforming foundation industries, part of Innovate UK. And we're going to be talking about how you turn effectively 66 million of seed investment into 200 million plus of co-investments. And I believe that number's growing, but we'll hear a bit more from Bruce about that. So essential, this sort of early stage innovation funding, as we know, is essential. So it'll be interesting to hear more about how Innovate UK and how Bruce has been leading the charge on this. So welcome, Bruce. Good to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Alex. Really looking forward to the next half an hour's discussion. All sorts of things together, I'm sure you imagine, in this. It's a fascinating area, loads of innovation going on, lots to talk about.
Good. All right, well, we'll start with a nice, easy question for you, which is just to ask you, both personally and professionally, how have you arrived at this point in time? How is it that you've come to be doing the work in decarbonisation, but also the work in general at Innovate UK? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I suppose you'd say I'm a steel man by background. I would done a PhD and a postdoc at university, nothing at all to do with steel, frankly, but ended up getting a job for what was then British Steel Technical back in 1994. Now, I got a job with them because I'd been writing big computer programs to solve quantum mechanics equations in my PhD. And to finite element model the rolling of hot steel, what do? Oh, you write large Fortran programs to diagonalize matrices to solve equations and find out things. So it meant that they could go, do you know what? It'll probably only take Bruce 3 to 6 months to get up in speed, whereas a new graduate would take potentially up to 3 years. And I was in and I was off. Yeah. And then it's all about doing research, running projects, becoming research programs. But gradually over time, my interest in the energy side of what was happening in the steel industry grew. And then at one point, for instance, I was managing the then British Steel's research department looking into furnaces. So obviously British Steel at the time is what we now know as Tata Steel UK, Liberty Steel, plus British Steel as it is now. So all furnaces across all those organisations within my team's remit in terms of innovation and development. And then it's just kept steamrolling. So gradually it moved on from interest in energy, widening to climate change, and indeed wider environmental. And as I've moved through my career, I've gradually done more things at the strategic level, and that's meant interacting with fellows in the other foundation industries where we got similar problems, wanting to talk about similar issues to government. And that's really led me to being at this point. It's that personal interest in the area. And I've just been lucky to have the opportunity to work with many people in many areas around energy and climate change over 20 or 30 years.
It's interesting. I should have done my homework better than I did, because I actually didn't know that you'd gone through that sort of research and development phase in your career as much as everything since. So really interesting then to be rooted in the UK, rooted in steel, but then to have this opportunity to drive how this seed investment fund is used. So let's come on to that challenge then. What was the origin of it? So sort of, I remember from our prep call that it had a sort of series of political owners, but what was kind of the origin of it, and when did it really kick off?
Yeah, so I mean, hopefully some people in the audience are aware that over the last 5 or more years, there's been a series of challenge funds looking at all sorts of industries and what's needed in the innovation space. And they've developed over 3 waves. And in the third wave, what UKI did was say, right, bring forward your expressions of interest for you as an industry. What do you think is your big challenge that you need to address? And there were literally, I think, probably pushing 200 expressions of interest came through. In the end, about 10 challenges came out of those 200. And certainly, pretty much all the foundation industries separately said, we've got a challenge. And the challenge was around what TFI has turned out to be, yes, and other things. But there was a realization process that actually the best thing to do was bring everybody together around those common challenges so that we could all work on them together. Because to be honest, and certainly my career history had been, you know, working for 10, 15 more years in advance of the challenge starting in some of these areas. Yes, making progress, but there were still definitely things and big things that needed to be achieved. And this gave a new avenue for addressing those. So that's the background for the challenge coming together. Some of my team were already working within Innovate UK. So my deputy director, Ben, was part of the team working on developing these challenges. I myself, of course, was in industry at the time. So I was attending events where we were talking between industry and UKRI and Innovate UK about how these challenges could come into existence and what they would be. But I was going to not just meetings around what will become TFI, but meetings around the industrial decarbonisation challenge, now led by Bryony Livesey, because I've been working in the CCS space and at the time was actually running the UK Carbon Capture and Research Centre. So you can see how this is all integrated into a wider piece. But it involved a lot of discussion and a lot of planning before we eventually got to this is what TFI should look like and building the business case to put forward for it to happen.
So we will come on to a couple of examples of projects. So for people listening from outside the UK, there's definitely content as this podcast plan develops that you'll be able to learn from. But just before we get there, let me just touch on the amount that was in the challenge fund, because it's one of those numbers, isn't it? 66 million to a taxpayer is like, what? What is this huge amount of money? Where's it going? But you and I know, Bruce, that when you say 66 million to an industrial manufacturer, they're like, oh, what? Ooh, that's like, how do we use that? So what was the origin of the amount? And what was maybe your perspective on it? What did you see as the opportunity, but clearly some challenges in that amount? And then we'll talk a bit more about the early months of the challenge as well.
Yeah. So from the perspective of a public funding body like UKRI, what you've got to be looking to do is making interventions where they're really needed, where what you might term more broadly, there's a market failure, and here a market failure in terms of being able to do the innovation you need to move things forward. So we were looking at it in the context of what are the things that we can do that would help to address that kind of market failure and not being able to do the innovation that businesses need. How can we help them move forward together? And in fact, that together thing was effectively one of those interventions. It was the saying, do you know what? We're going to make some funding available, but in this instance, we think there's a failure in that you're not doing enough together. So we're going to say when we run competitions for funding that projects are going to have to be of relevance to more than one foundation industry at a time. And that would be one of the scope criteria that we would use again and again during the challenge. So we were looking at what should we do? So yes, we've had what people in the UK would recognise as a fairly typical Innovate UK collaborative R&D programme for which money was set aside, about 30 million of the 66. But we also wanted to try to improve the capability for upscaling and piloting technology. That's led to us investing in the primarily glass focused, but also usable for the other foundation industries, investment of glass futures in the Northwest, alongside the region and the industry themselves to make that happen. So that was a chunk of about 15 million. Then I think we'll talk in a bit about our investor partnership program. We put some millions against that. We've invested in developing the research base and improving their links of working with industry. So we've started up a Network Plus, which is focused on building the academic community around the foundation industries. And we invested in a hub, which is where industry meets academia to do projects of interest across the foundation industries. So what we were also doing is trying to make use of the best things available from within UKRI. So we say that my challenge is delivered by Innovate UK, EPSRC, the Engineering Research Council, and the ESRC, the Economic and Social Research Council. And it's taken the best from all of those to deliver this challenge as well as we have.
So the surface level, like if you just look at the header and the exec summary of the challenge, is that it's a focus on both resource and energy efficiency. But as you've just hinted at, really in practical terms, what it's really about is about this collaboration across industries, and industries that certainly then were not typically engaging with each other. So just if you kind of take us back to that early stage, like how do you actually, in practical terms, get these industries to collaborate or to talk or to share information or to, how does that work? And then we'll look at how do we then bring the investors in through this partnering program.
Yeah. So going back a little bit more to the history of the challenge, you obviously have to get approval to deploy these resources that's been made available by government. And what actually happened was we were initially allowed to move forward with our first planned collaborative R&D competition. Now, of course, as you're putting the challenge together, you've got to, and making the business case for it, you've got to have a certain group of industrial stakeholders who are already behind, the intent here. They believe in what you're going to do, and they are saying, if the public money comes forward, we will invest. We will be on board, and we will get involved. So what we did was, having approval for that first competition, we set it going, and we literally called it our fast start competition, because it was about giving the opportunity for those stakeholders who were already on board across the foundation industries the opportunity to come together, put forward first projects, and get moving as quickly as we could. Now, I'm not saying that there weren't screams and howls of anguish from some people across the industries when we went, right, every proposal that comes forward to this competition has to be for innovation that is of relevance to at least 2 foundation industries. And in the terms of foundations, I mean foundation industries and their supply chains. So, for instance, if you had a situation where a technology had been deployed in one industry, could be deployed in another industry, but there was innovation needed to make that happen, you could create a project around that because it effectively involved 2 industries, you could bring that forward. So that gave us a chance to let the first movers get involved, get going, and they would also demonstrate then to others, you can do this. Things like, you might be sat there going, well, we can't work with these people because there are commercial considerations, there are, competition considerations. People tend to get in a mindset of we can't do stuff, whereas in actual fact, there is a lot you can do. So we set out to demonstrate, and then, of course, we organised sessions around the country for people to come and get together and talk about these things, and we could try and, again, put across what you can do and get the whole thing moving. And in that way, we just tried to get the ball rolling, really.
So before we come on to the investor piece, I'm just wondering, like, when you think about that phase, obviously there's a lot of positive stuff that came out of that. What would you say to those listening who are either in countries or regions that don't yet have those sorts of challenge projects in place, but maybe are in countries that are thinking about them? There's quite a lot, actually,
Yeah.
particularly in Asia, other parts of South America, and Africa, where there is money that's starting, like this kind of seed capital, if you like, that governments are thinking of applying. From just that early phase of getting people engaged, what would you say to them are the three takeaways, that either things you wish you'd done sooner or maybe differently? Or is there anything that strikes you as a sort of, lots went well, but these are the things you want to watch out for? What would you say?
Well, I think it really is that the key thing is, if you're thinking about this, don't forget that, or don't fall into the trap of, we've a series of industries in our geography that we want to support, so we must just give each of them some support to do that. Yeah, I mean, you do need to do that, and the companies within those industries, they also need to keep going on with what they would be doing anyway. You're looking to help them do more, essentially, but in helping them to do more, don't just go, right, it's the steel silo or the chemical industry silo or the glass industry silo. There's an enormous amount of opportunity for them to work together to move things forward. Now, a really good example, we've had a lot of discussion with colleagues in India, both from the public funding perspective and across the industries. And through the time of COVID, actually, we did a lot of virtual work to just arrange sessions for us to talk to each other. So people talked, we arranged sessions between businesses within each sector, and then set up cross-sector discussions and facilitated introductions and conversations, all leading towards we will eventually put some money, make some money available at both ends, in India and here, so that companies could come together to do exactly that. Now, there was, in that context, a lot of discussion had to be had to introduce our Indian colleagues to the concept of doing things as foundation industries, because they very much are still in, there's these great big silos, and they've got massive companies, often still a lot longer along each of those value chains than perhaps we are here. Yeah, so there's those considerations as well, and we have also had an awful lot of learning to do to understand, where things were similar, where things were different, and why what we are doing here would work for some and not for others. But it's all about having those conversations well in advance of trying to deploy an intervention is key, really.
I just want to take this opportunity to thank our production partner and sponsor, Jano Media, for their support in delivering the Decarb Connect podcast. Over the last few years, they've helped us to facilitate great conversations that connect us with our audience, and their skills and expertise mean that we get to concentrate exclusively on generating the content, the conversations that engage, inform, and inspire. Clearly, taking 66 million and turning it into 200 million plus, as the title of this podcast is, the secret sauce also lies in this investor partnering program that you alluded to. So who were those original kind of investors that came to the table, and what brought them there? How did you get them there? And then from there, we'll then explore two specific projects and how this all has come together.
So I spoke a few minutes ago about trying to take the best and most relevant types of intervention that the likes of Innovate UK had available and understood how to do, and apply them and make most of them in the challenge. And one of those was Innovate UK's investor partnership program. They'd been piloting it for a couple of years before we came into existence, and we looked at that and we went, we think that needs to be part of our jigsaw. Yeah. And those programs focus around developing a partnership with a group of investors, and then finding relevant companies, yeah, looking at their innovation proposals, working out whether they can be funded and going forward. So the first thing we did was we did some background work to go and have a look at which investors might be out there who would be interested in partnering with us around innovation in the foundation industries. Because we do have the classic situation, and we talk about it all the time, of how there's not enough investment, certainly in these industries, in this context. It's all off to banking or IT or whatever it may be. but we're thinking surely there are actually investors out there who have interests and part of their raison d'etre, and that proved to us, to be honest, that it was worthwhile going ahead. It also meant we started to establish contacts with various investors. So then what we do is, in a similar manner to we normally put out a call for projects for innovation projects, we actually put out a call for investors to become part of a group, to support this program. So, it's not quite the same, but in a similar manner, they had to put the reasoning to us as to why they should be included in this group and the reasons for working with us. So we brought together half a dozen investors, including some that people will be familiar with, like the Clean Growth Fund, maybe which is HG Ventures from the States. There's an investor from Germany and some others. SpeedInvest involved. So they came together as our kind of investor group, and what they commit to is saying, if Innovate funds a project with a particular SME, we will invest the same amount that Innovate do. Now, as Innovate for an SME, we can fund up to 70% of the innovation project costs. So if you're then saying already at the start point, the investors are going to bring in at least the same, the company is getting its innovation project funded, plus some of that extra support from investors that you would normally expect. And that's the starting point. So once we got the group of investors alongside ourselves, we both went out and started to alert the community to this opportunity and find companies of interest. They then come back to us with this is what we who we are, what we're doing, what we want to do. If the investors went, well, we like the look of that, then a full research proposal was brought forward. We would assess it in the normal ways that we would for any Innovate UK funded project. Does it meet the criteria? Is it of sufficient quality? And if it is, then that project would go ahead and would be funded. And so that's what we've done in that arena.
And have those half a dozen or so investors, did more come, or was it more that they were increasing their stake, or how did that kind of?
So essentially, when you put these projects in place, you do know that there's a good chance that they're going to be successful, because both ourselves and the investor group have gone, this looks good. So pretty much in all cases, what's actually happened is the initial innovation project has been successful, and that's led to the company being able to continue to move through its development. And most of these companies have now had Series A, and some are moving towards Series B investments off the back of having been able to do the innovation project which we supported, and hence the level of co-investment that has spun off the back of our original investment is growing. There comes a point where you go, that's no longer anything to do with our initial piece, but in those immediate years following the innovation project, there is a direct link between what we funded and then what they've done next, and you can go, okay, that is credible co-investment that's come off the back of that initial investment piece by UKRI.
Okay. And then I always reserve the right to ask a stupid qualifying question. So here's my stupid qualifying question, which is, I'm assuming that for Innovate UK, like the funding is in the form more of grants, or, rather than, it's certainly not a debt fund, it's not an equity fund, but what was it?
Yeah.
What was the reality for the investors?
So they don't, in this scheme, they've not been taking equity and things. It's not been of that form, and obviously, I say obviously, I'll just come back to that in a second. It's not been of that form for us either. We were giving grants. Yeah. Now that isn't to say, of course, that beyond TFI, Innovate UK doesn't do other forms of investment, because obviously now there are loans and other schemes which are different. But in this case, our initial funding was a grant to do a research project. It was just that we'd made this scheme so that an investor would come in with an aligned amount to help them have more than the total they needed to do the project, and then that works very well for an SME, of course. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, then let's look at two particular projects. I know you're joining us actually at Decarb Connect UK in Manchester at the end of February, and we're going to be
Yep.
talking there about the Unilever project that you were involved in. But today we're going to focus in on Cement to Zero, which I believe is Teesside, and Rectify project,
Yep.
which is Tata Steel and Aggregate Industry. So let's just have a look at those. So if you can give us the kind of one or two lines on each, like where did they fit in the kind of the theme of the challenge,
Yep.
and how have they delivered or come to fruition?
So, of course, one of the things we need to try and do as a challenge is intervene in a number of parts of the sort of TRL, technology readiness level scheme. So we funded within the challenge in the entirety, everything from sort of feasibility studies right the way through to what we call, I'm going to say, pilot scale demonstration in terms of the foundation industries. Yeah. So these projects we're talking about here are those kind of pilot demonstration projects. Yeah. So Cement to Zero is piloting using end-of-life cement as a flux in an electric arc furnace process to both produce steel and capture the slag off the process, which can then be used back in the cement industry. So it's a sort of win-win. You're taking now recycled cement and recycled steel, converting it using an EAF process, which is a known process, so we know how to do it, tweaking some of the chemistries in terms of the things that you're putting in, and therefore what the chemical content of the slag that's sitting on top of the molten metal is, such that when you tap it off, you've got a material that can then be used as part of a new cement production process. So that project comes off an innovation coming out of Cambridge University. They created a spin out called Cambridge Electric Cement. So they're a partner, and it's like it's about getting their technology out of their lab scale and into pilot scale. Now, the great thing is at the Materials Processing Institute on Teesside, which used to be a British Steel research lab, they have a pilot electric arc furnace for up to seven tons of steel in scale. So that's exactly the thing you need. Yeah. And trials have been going on there through the autumn. If anybody wanted to, if you do the classic Google Cement to Zero, you will find a video showing the first trials that have happened there. And as we speak and across this year, what will now happen is, having done work at that scale at MPI, trials will take place at Celsa's Steelworks at a bigger scale. Yeah. And so that's exactly what we need to be trying to do, is get innovations out of that lab scale through pilot to the stage where industry have got enough confidence to do an industrial trial. Yeah.
So that particular project clearly ticks the resource efficiency part of the theme.
Yeah.
Talk to us about Rectify.
So Rectify, again, to a considerable extent, is resource efficiency focused. And I think I'll make a point now that I've realized I'm not made earlier. You mentioned at the beginning that we were very much focused on resource efficiency and energy efficiency. Now, we were focused on that because you had the industrial decarbonisation challenge, which is focused at CCS and hydrogen. But BEIS, as was at the time, is running its fuel switching program. So all of those things effectively have been dealt with elsewhere. So we didn't cover those. So there's no kind of double funding as it were. But then when we got started, what actually happened in the main was that resource efficiency was the area where there's not really been funding available before. It was kind of the new kid on the block. There's not so much work been done in the policy space in previous years. Therefore, there's not the sort of funding to support implementation of policy was not there. So we have found that as every year has gone by, the percentage of things that have been brought to us that are resource efficiency focused rather than energy efficiency focused has been growing. Yeah. Now, I think that's genuinely because we were sort of the first available fund, but I think also because the world is changing out there and everybody has a much bigger appreciation now, 4 or 5 years down the line, that resource efficiency is something that we've got to deal with. And if we deal with it now, it gives us quick wins. Yeah. And then they're in place and they'll be giving us that win every year through to 2050 and beyond. So that was a bit of a monologue, but back to the Rectify project. So Rectify is led by EMR, the big recyclers, and as you say, involves Tata Steel UK, Aggregate Industries, Darlow Lloyd, and Swansea University, providing some of the research background. Overall, it's a £10 million project. We contributed a £3.4 million grant. So you can see that predominantly the cost of the project has come from the industry side, but we've provided enough to be able to get the project off the ground, and they could all say, yeah, we can go for this. So what they're focused at primarily is generating a new supply chain for high-grade recycled steel within the UK. At the moment, too much of our steel is collected. It's all mixed up, becomes a relatively low-grade scrap per ton of scrap, and as many will be aware, much of it gets exported as a relatively cheap raw material, comes back to us as something much more expensive. So we really need to work on that supply chain. And what this group has done, and I think you'll see from the names that it is very much through supply chain. Yeah, by working together, they've identified the parts in the supply chain where some new technology is needed. Yeah, whether it's in a sort of monitoring or measuring or segregating, processes, so that there are pieces of work going on in all those areas, so that they can set up this new supply chain that they know will deliver high grade scrap, and at the same time, again, some new alternative raw materials for cement production. So it becomes a win-win in multiple industries, and we're helping to set up, as I say, this future supply chain.
So when you think about, I mean, those projects and others that you were allocating grants to and securing additional investment around, when you think back, how have your perceptions about what was possible in that kind of collaboration, that value chain engagement, has anything changed? Like, are you now expecting more? Are you expecting less? Are you expecting different? What have been, some of the perception shifts for you or for the team?
So I think for me personally, I always knew this was possible. So in my career, I'd seen some good examples of this kind of collaboration, but they were just one-off. It just tended to be certain circumstances. They worked and they happened. I think more generally you could see that there was a huge amounts of possibility, and I think in terms of the cross-foundation collaborative work, I think genuinely, and others I suppose should be the ones to judge really, that we have really helped to stimulate that happening, and it's a much more accepted way of taking things forward now than it was 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah, we see a lot more companies involved in it. We do get good feedback about, you've opened our eyes to it, because there were those back at the beginning were saying, okay, it's only 66 million chalked, but even so, we just want you to divide it by 6 and give us each 11 million quid to go and do whatever we like. And you're like, no, that's not the purpose. The purpose is to sort of create an opportunity to be able to do more in a different way than we did before, to bring forward our innovation. So we've seen that. But going beyond the foundation industries piece, it's become absolutely clear that in the medium to longer term, the solution here is absolutely up and down the supply chains as well as across these industries. So we've said we will talk about it at the conference in a few weeks' time. The project being led by Unilever is a prime example of how it's the person more towards the business, more towards the consumer, us as individual consumer end, who needs to get involved and be driving and demanding, as we call it, sort of so-called demand-led innovation of everybody else back through the supply chain. And in years gone by, because there were so many steps down that chain, there just wasn't the linkage, so that you would have the likes of Unilever in that case, literally working with paper companies and Tata Steel at the other end on delivering something for that market. And we see that as we go forward, we're just going to have to do more and more of that. And when we are seeing, I'm sure there'll be plenty of examples at the conference of companies who are coming there saying, we are demanding things and working with our supply chains to deliver what we need.
Yeah, I definitely get the sense that, I mean, I think it's been a number of years now since anyone really thought that innovation around decarbonisation behind closed doors was entirely the right way to go, because you just miss so many opportunities. And there are just a number of case studies I can think of where people took bigger steps forward because they were far more aware of what others had already done, or because they collaborated with another industry. It sort of, yeah, it feels now like this is almost becoming the
It's
standard.
time, I would say,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So coming back to the title then, and let's sort of answer this one again with the internationals listening in mind, because if you're from the UK and you're listening to this, these stories have a different kind of resonance, and you have a different context for them. But if you're not from the UK and you're listening in to this, let's just go back to this idea of what was it that really enabled you to convert that 66 million into 200 million? I know you've talked through it in a number of ways, but what do you think ultimately it was that brought those investors into the mix with 3 or 4 times sometimes, what the original grant might have been?
Yeah. I mean, it's a number of things. And I'm gonna go back to something we talked about earlier about making a series of different interventions, because if you just do one thing, you're only going to capture a certain group wanting to do certain things. Yeah. So we've invested in pilot scale capability in terms of glass futures. Now, that's meant investment from, yes, lots of companies across the glass sector, many of whom are, of course, owned outside of the UK. So they're making decisions about investing here and doing other things. And in fact, already Glass Futures working with Diageo, and this has just been announced within the last week or two, are developing a footprint in both the USA and India to take the model there, because Diageo know they need that kind of model to deliver the packaging products that they need right across their global footprint. But the first point I was going to make about Glass Futures is there's a regional thing there. So it's brought in regional investment. It's been part of redeveloping the town of St. Helens, and St. Helens has been awarded a town fund. It's included in the wider innovation developments across Liverpool City region, and of course they now have an innovation zone. Again, Glass Futures is part of that in terms of wider. Yeah, so there's been a lot of building from an initial investment. Yeah, in terms of what it's helped stimulate in other forms of investment, not just literally just doing a research project. There's going to be a new manufacturing facility in St. Helens very shortly, a company coming inwards. These sort of things have spun off the back. Yes, then there's been the whole range of SMEs and startups that have been supported, some directly through the investor program that we talked about earlier, but many others that have been building out of our collaborative R&D program and in all sorts of areas, and they also have been getting Series A investments in particular, off the back of successfully completing a collaborative R&D project that we funded. You do get that feedback with companies saying the fact that we got money from Innovate UK and then successfully completed those projects, the investors go, that's a bit of a guarantee or part of the guarantee that these people know what they're doing and they're worth investing in. Yeah, so there is a linkage there. So a whole range of things has brought people in, but it's having that different offerings right across the innovation space, I think, has been key. And this is where I kind of push the challenge model, of addressing a challenge rather than just saying we need to make an investment in technology X for industry Y. What you need to do is set yourself a challenge and say we're going to address that challenge and work out which are the best interventions we should make in the innovation space to address that challenge, and then put those offerings out there, and work with people to deliver on them.
Well, I was going to ask you what the mental model shift is that needs to happen, but I think you've answered it there. It is that the piece of not falling back on old habits of just shoveling a bundle of cash at an industry, but looking more at the kind of the horizontal challenge, if you like, and how to engage those early faster movers to show something's possible to then engage a wider audience. But I think that's really fascinating, and just so interesting to hear, because often in any country and in any news cycle, what you hear at the moment is a lot about, oh, all this money going into climate spend, but it's to actually be able to hear, yes, but what that money then drew in addition, and the behaviors that it's starting to influence and change. I think that's really fascinating stuff, and something that we can all build on no matter where we're based. So just as a closeout, Bruce, what's next for you? What's kind of on the horizon? What new projects are coming your way?
Well, I think the main thing is that we are, I and my team, we are actively working in the background to be able to drive forward this demand-led innovation agenda. There's something I've just been talking with the team about that we're gonna try and flag up at the conference next month, that we're doing in the concrete space. As Innovate UK, we've launched what's a relatively modest funding program now, but it around the innovation in the concrete space, where we brought together a group of those, I'm going to call them demanders, and they've said, right, we're committed to working on this program, and the call has then gone out for innovations that will help those demanders meet their needs. So we'll talk about a bit more about that at the conference, and just continually working on how can we provide novel interventions to help companies move forward and drive this agenda, because that's what we should be about. It's supporting companies to do that in ways that perhaps we didn't think were possible, but we know we need, and we need to make happen. So I'll be continuing my efforts in that space. Have we got a couple of minutes? Can I just mention one other thing?
We do. Go for it.
Right, brilliant. Okay, so one of the things that has arisen sort of out of TFI, it's not quite that straightforward, is a program called Economizer. And actually now there's Economizer 2. So what's happened there is we have provided funding to a number of research organizations in the foundation industry space across the UK to build up their capability and capacity in terms of equipment that's available for companies to do scale up in terms of innovation. So the group includes the Materials Processing Institute that I talked before. Includes Glass Futures, which we helped start. That probably wouldn't find that surprising. It includes the Centre for Process Industries, CPI, which has quite a footprint across the UK now. It includes Lucidian, who are experts in ceramics development, and it includes from the academic side the Henry Royce Institute, which is obviously mostly based in Manchester, but is in Sheffield and other universities across the country as well. So they've come together, and we've provided them with funding, mostly for additional bits of kit, bits that are missing from their capability, but also to put in place research fellows and application scientists whose job are both to go out there and understand what it is the different industries need together in terms of scale up and what projects need to be done, and then have people at the Royce and these organizations who are just dedicated to doing often sort of 3 to 6 month long projects. We just need to find out something to then see if we can go forward. So continuing to build capacity at a UK level to be able to support foundation industries to do their innovation is also another key forward theme for myself and my team.
Great. Well, Bruce, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us, with me, but to the audience as well about this project. And for those who are able to join us, Bruce will be talking at Decarb Connect UK in Manchester in the last week of February. And I'll put a link to that as well as to the challenge. And I'll also find that video that you mentioned for Cement to Zero, and you'll be able to find those links in the show notes. And my closing challenge then to the listeners is, make sure you send this podcast on to the policymakers, policy influencers, those in your country that are maybe looking at the deployment of initial seed funding, seed grants, if you will, because I think there's a lot that people can take from this about how to really create that amplifying effect and success. So thank you, Bruce, for sharing that.
At Jano Media, we recognise that great content has the power to create impactful and positive change for lives and society. Whether that's video, live streams, photography or podcasts, partnering with us will enable you to harness the power of content to engage, inform and inspire. Reach out to us today.